The Bible begins with a picture of God creating a garden, and God creates people to take care of that garden. In the wonderfully hands-on way this creation story has been handed down, God gets down in the dirt and creates a man from the soil. His name is Adam, which in Hebrew means earth or soil. Then God creates animals to keep him company, but none of them are quite right, so God creates Eve. In Hebrew, her name Hava or Weva means life. So in this story, Adam and Eve together meant that God created earth and life, and humans were symbolic of it. We are earth and life, and we are given responsibility to care for earth and life. In these next 5 weeks in worship, we're going to take a few pages out of a book by Diana Butler Bass. It's called Grounded. And it's a book that talks about a different kind of spirituality, rooted in our faith traditions, but a spirituality that goes beyond the four walls of a church. This is probably a good time to talk about faith in such a way when we are not inside our church walls. Even though most of us have strong attachments to the places where we gather for work and worship, we also powerfully feel the heartbeat of God in other places. Under a star-spangled heaven, or beside a reflective lake, or in the close cool of a forest path among ancient trees. The experience of the holy isn't confined to our churches. Butler Bass talks about that feeling the power of God's Spirit in wild and wilderness places, on lonely mountains or in vast deserts. But she's also seen God at work in the hearts of our cities. She tells a story of a monastery in California that used to occupy 15 acres, mostly vertical acres, on the side of a mountain overlooking Santa Barbara and the Great Pacific Ocean. So high up, it felt as if you were touching heaven. But like the wildfires that we are seeing today raging through California, 12 years ago, a fire rushed up that mountain and destroyed the monastery. And the monks fled down to the city and took shelter with the Sisters of St. Mary in a convent. They decided not to rebuild. They liked the feeling of being with the people on the earth, not soaring above it all. Some people miss the soaring views and the otherworldly feel of the mountaintop retreat, but now they're invited to sit in gardens and hear the sounds of the city all around them and know that God is there. For thousands of years, the church has taught about a three-tiered universe, with heaven above, where God lives, the world in the middle, where we are, and the world below, where we fear we might end up after we die. The church became the mediator between heaven and earth, receiving directives above and telling them to the people. And if they followed the directives, they would eventually go up to live up there and avoid the turmoil below. This vision of the world and God held through many centuries, but it broke in the last century. A century that began with a war that killed about 17 million people worldwide. And then within a generation, a second war was fought that had 3 times the casualties and incredible human atrocities, like the Holocaust, the prisoner of war camps in Europe and Japan, and the atomic bombs. One survivor of these concentration camps simply wrote, "For God's sake, where is God?" Butler Bass says that people picked up the pieces of their lives with less trust in a sky god who would help them, and with more certainty that humans were fully capable of creating the terrors of hell on their own, and they didn't need an underworld or a lake of fire to prove to them that evil existed. She said, "Our three-tiered picture of the world collapsed, and we were left here. And it was like God was like those monks racing down in front of the wildfire. And God has come racing into our lives here and has remained, not up there above it all, but here, with us, in us, all around us, the ground of our being." So her book starts at the ground, in the soil, in a garden, like the Bible did. My grandmother died before I was born, but one of the things I know about her from stories and pictures is that she loved gardening. She raised and fed 11 children on a farm, many of them born in the early years of the Great Depression. They worked at farming in the heart of the Palliser Triangle, an area in southwest Saskatchewan deemed unsuitable for agriculture, and a land that lifted into the sky and blew away in great choking black clouds of dust in the early 30s. But despite devastating conditions, they had to try to live off the land. Gardening was a necessity for food. She always planted more than an acre of potatoes, and endless long rows of carrots, beets, cabbage, beans, and peas. She had 5 huge rhubarb plants and a stand of chokecherry trees for vitamin C, where there was no fruit coming from BC. Hers was a garden destined for canning and the root cellar. But she also had gardens exploding with chest-high flowers, lupins and gladiolas, sunflowers and poppies, not just contained in a bed or two, but a riot, waving fields of flowers. My grandmother loved gardening, being outside in the beauty and the smells, working the ground, chasing off bugs, battling the dry wind, enjoying the still evenings, cutting flowers, and filling plates with the work of her hands. Margaret Atwood wrote, "In spring, at the end of the day, you should smell like dirt." Those who spend much of their time in the garden tend to feel a bit sorry for those in urban landscapes who are surrounded by concrete and pavement and have so little opportunity to escape to the earth. And those who touch life in a garden are also those who most grieve when great tracts of earth get paved over or sterilized with toxins or treated solely as a commodity to make money instead of as a living miracle. This pandemic we are enduring has spawned a new generation of gardeners. In the spring, nurseries and garden centers had initially thought their seedlings would have to be composted when businesses had to close to stop the virus. But when they opened, they found across the country that they couldn't keep up with the demands for plants, seeds, tools, and advice. People worried about getting food in the grocery stores and the security of our food chains. And people were home a lot. and some who had never paid attention to the world under their feet suddenly felt a call to explore its promises. They started looking for the first time at their yards and laneways and balconies as places to get their hands in dirt and grow a garden. For hundreds of thousands of years, the land has been the beginning of faith. Gratitude for it, struggling with it, reflecting on it, recognizing its power, feeling its loss. Religious people for centuries have spoken of the land as a metaphor for faith because it is something we relate to. In his story of the sower and the seed, Jesus tells of one who comes sowing on all different types of ground. Some ground was too hard, impenetrable, and the seed bounced off and the birds ate it. Some ground was too shallow and the seed took root but burnt out because it didn't go down far enough. Some ground was full of weeds and got good seeds choked out by the bad. And some ground was open to receive what was being sown, and it grew and multiplied and became a great gift. Jesus didn't explain the story, but he was talking about people and how we're able to receive something good in our lives. Some of us are hard, some shallow, some too full of competing interests, and the good stuff has a hard time sinking in. He was inviting people to be good soil for life to grow in them, for good news to grow in them. Soil is like us. We are like it. Soil can become stressed, burnt out, overused, underfed, hard, in poor health. It can get to the point where it will produce nothing and it can die. But if we're people who believe in resurrection, in life that comes out of death, then we can work to renew the soil, and it can renew and sustain us. Butler Bass talked about a church that started up in California, and it was simply a garden. They don't have a building to worship in. They gather for worship on a Sunday morning in the midst of flowers and vegetables, in the midst of the dirt. And they sing and pray and speak and worship God. And the miracle of life is all around them. And if it rains, they go in the greenhouse. Their mission as a church was to grow food for their community, to learn how to garden and take care of the soil and share those learnings with people who never knew how. People who could benefit from nutritious food, peaceful work, community connections. That congregation is working to eliminate hunger and poverty and meaninglessness in their community. The earth is our teacher and our provider, a source of beauty and life, food and wisdom. There is much miracle and mystery going on under our feet in the earth. I asked people yesterday in the Bible study what people could learn of God from the earth, from a garden. And they said, we can learn that we draw our life from there, that we're connected. We can learn patience. We can learn perseverance. We can allow ourselves to be surprised by life. There's a lot to learn from God in a garden. There are a lot of things we don't know about faith. Lots of things we just take on faith. Life, death, the mystery of resurrection, eternal life. But Butler Bass says what we do know for sure is that this life is real. We are here on this planet, walking around on the same ground depending on the same soil for life, and God is with us. Earth is not an illusion, a tragic dream, or a spiritual metaphor. Earth is definitely for real. Finding God in the dirt allows us to experience faith in new ways. What farmers have known for centuries, many are just now beginning to understand. There is holiness in dirt. Thanks be to God.